Well, joining me for more on this, former British Army Colonel Hamish to Bretton-Gordon. Also joining us, TalkTV's international editor, Isabel Oakshott. The pair of you, thank you for making time. Hamish, I will come to you first, if you don't mind, just regarding Britain's policy with approaching the Houthis and the way they're attacking ships in the Red Sea. Do you agree that it's the right policy?
Yes, I do. I believe it's absolutely right. And I think people probably have got rather confused from seeing precision strikes in, say, Afghanistan and Iraq and even in Gaza, trying to hit fleeting terrorist targets, to what we've seen in Yemen is where we've struck physical assets, launchers, drones, and that is much easier. And if we take that out of the hands of the Houthis, they have very little to threaten us. Now, I was in Syria in August 2013 when Obama's red line evaporated and the government voted not to strike the chemical weapons facilities of Assad. He continued to use his chemical weapons for 5 years, killed thousands of civilians. And it wasn't until 2018 when Britain and the States decided to attack Assad's chemical weapons facilities that the chemical weapons stopped and were never used again, except for some toxic chemicals in 2019. And I think that Obama red line, those precision strikes, absolutely show if you take out capability like the Houthi missiles or drones, like Assad's chemical weapons program, you can really stop things in their tracks. So absolutely, I think militarily, we're yet to see the full details, but this should stop the majority of the attacks in the Red Sea. And if they continue, and I know there's been one today, then we need to repeat it until those missiles and drones can no longer affect shipping in the Red Sea.
And indeed, Sunak was keen to point out what he called the malign narrative of people conflating what Britain is doing with regards to strikes in Yemen and conflating that with what's happening with regards to Gaza as well. But all of this, Isabel, is of course shining a huge spotlight on defence spending in Britain as an election year is heating up. And do you think these criticisms that we're not spending enough at home are correct?
Oh, completely. I mean, I co-authored a book a few years ago on the state of the UK's armed forces called, for good reason, White Flag. I mean, over the last decade or so, we have very significantly degraded our capabilities, primarily because there's been a political sense that we're just not going to have any more wars. We're not going to do war anymore. We are so bruised, I think, from the failures of Afghanistan, which started for all the right reasons and did not end, in anyone's view, in great glory, that there has been a very, very deep-seated political reluctance to contemplate that we will ever do any such thing again. Now, of course, what we're doing at the moment, what the UK is doing in supporting the US on these strikes is, only an absolute tiny fraction of the long years of boots on the ground in Afghanistan. But having any such capability requires proper resourcing. And I think one thing that has been somewhat exposed by this crisis in the Red Sea is the limitations at this point of our Navy. I've wrote today for the Telegraph about why the aircraft carriers aren't being used. Both our aircraft carriers are languishing currently in that great trouble spot known as Portsmouth Harbour. We simply do not have the required support ships and personnel to send them anywhere near the danger zone. And some will argue, well, they're not actually needed at the moment because we've got a base in Cyprus and we're still able to be effective. I'm a little bit less optimistic than Henry about the impact of what we're doing. I think it's absolutely right that we have a go. We have to have red lines. Whether we very quickly are able to limit the Houthi capability is another question altogether.
Thanks, Isabel. I mean, coming back to you, Hamish, and what this underfunding in the British military actually looks like. At this point, I should disclose that my father is a retired lieutenant colonel. I am a child of the British Army. It's a topic I'm very interested in. And the way that the armed forces and the military has changed, certainly over the last 13 years of Conservative government. But how much of a crisis is it in your eyes?
Well, it's true. We've really paid lip service to our military capabilities since the end of the Cold War. When I joined the British Army as a tank commander at the end of the 80s, we had over 500 tanks. Today, we can barely get 100 out of out of the tank sheds to fight. So it's, and crucially, terror groups like Hamas, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Hezbollah, and tyrants like Putin only understand strength. If they see any weaknesses, that's exactly what they go for. And remembering that the first duty of our government is the security and protection of this country, we need to make sure we got the forces. Now, absolutely, we've got a recruiting crisis at the moment, but the men and women in the British military are still the best in the world. And if we give them the kit to do the job, they can more than ably do it. But it really does take some finance and building up, because as Isabel and everybody else has said, we have really not done this. The peace dividend, as the Prime Minister has said, has really been used up. And in this volatile world, Putin is not going to stop in Ukraine if he prevails. All the stuff that's happening in the Middle East is only going to get worse if we stand on the sidelines and do nothing. And I know there are an awful lot of people out there who seem to think we can negotiate our way out of it, and it's all, flowers and lovely things. Unfortunately, the world of warfare and fighting is just not like that. Of course, we'd like a political and diplomatic solution to everything, but unfortunately, sometimes you need to fight, and we need to make sure that the British military, the Army, Navy, and Air Force has the capability to do that to protect this country.
Okay, so then finally, Isabel, how do you square away with the public, if you were, say, a politician in this country, the need to provide funding to Ukraine to the level of £2.5 billion, but at the same time have enough defence spending back home? Can you understand when people, if they even feel like they support Ukraine, say, but that's a lot of money?
Oh, absolutely. And first of all, just very quickly, apologies to Hamish. You're Hamish, not Henry. It was a slightly bad line at the beginning of the show. So yeah, I mean, even myself, I've been thinking hard about this figure. It's an enormous figure that we've just given Ukraine, 2.5 billion. I mean, to put that into context, that was the original estimate of the cost of both of our aircraft carriers, of constructing them back in the 90s. So it's a sizable sum. And I can understand why voters might think, well, hang on a minute, we've barely got enough ships to surround our own carrier. We can't necessarily be sure of keeping our own borders safe, never mind sending this great lump of money to Ukraine. But this is not just their war, it's our war as well. And as Hamish said, what happens over there if we don't put down a very firm foot on what's going on President Putin's ambitions? They're not going to stop with Ukraine, and Ukraine cannot win this battle by itself. And it's very much, I think, also part of where Britain should be on the world stage. As Hamish said, we have among the very best armed forces in the world. Some will say the best, particularly our special forces capability. So let's use them. Let's use them to project this country on the world stage, and to try to create a safer and more stable world for everybody. Because what happens all over the place, I'm afraid, comes right back to affect us every day.
Hamish to Bretton-Gordon, Isabel Oakshott, thank you both for your insights this evening.